Hi everyone, it's Laura here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I will be sharing my first impressions on my new Nuvo Mica Mists by Tonic Studios, and I will also show you some quick cards that I made using these products. The mica mists are a liquid product where basically mica powders and pigments are mixed together so that you can simultaneously add color and shimmer to your projects. They come in spray bottles that contain about 80 milliliters of product and will allow you to create some really fun effects on your projects. You just want to make sure to shake well the bottles before using the product so that the pigments and the mica powders mix well together. The mica mists are available in 6 different colors. This one you just saw was the Nebula Blue. This one right here is the Violet Lasser. Then there is the Turkish Rose, which is this delicate pink. This bright green over here is the Fresh Pear. And then we have the Antique Gold. And finally the Silver Smoke. And this was the very first time for me to play with these products. So in this video I will show you how they look and I will share with you my very first experiments so that you can see them in action in case you're interested. And I'll be starting with a swatch so that you can see how they look when sprayed onto paper. So I started with the Nebula Blue and the Fresh Pear. And then I moved on to the Turkish Rose. And I am using some strips of watercolor cardstock because I wanted the support that would be able to stand up to this liquid product. And this here is the Violet Lasser, which is really intense and beautiful. And then finally here you can see the Silver Smoke and the Antique Gold. I then used my heat gun to quickly dry these swatches, and here you can see how shimmery they are once they catch the light. The effect is really pretty and the colors are really beautiful, and if you haven't guessed by now, I am really happy about these products. So as I said, this was my very first time playing with the mica mists, and I tried to use some different techniques to test them out. And to get started and sort of get a feel for this product, I took some watercolor cardstock, which I cut to a standard A2 size, and I started spraying the Turkish Rose all over the panel. And you can already see that by varying the distance from which you spray this product on the paper, you either get a fine mist or get a more spotty appearance. And then I decided to come in with the Violet Lasser and see how these colors would layer and mix with each other. I will be adding a bit more of the Turkish Rose, and at this stage I am really experimenting and playing, and what I wanted to check is if I could mix these colors, but as you can see I got just some minimal mixing and only in the really wet areas, and other than that the colors just sat on top of each other. I then sped up the drying process with my heat gun because I wanted to go in with the second layer to see if this would activate the product I already had on my paper. So I wanted to make sure that I had everything dry before moving on and adding again more of the mists onto my paper. So once everything was dry, I came in with a second layer and I added more of that Violet Lasser, and later on I will be also coming in with more of the Turkish Rose. And as you can see, the second layer basically just sat on top of my paper without moving the pigments underneath. And this allowed me to get this fun background where this sort of sprayed on look was preserved. And the fact that you can layer the mists without reactivating them also allows you to mix complementary colors without getting muddy results, and I will come back to this later on. But at this point I had sort of warmed up and I felt a little bit more brave, and I decided that I wanted to see what would happen if I used the heavier hand with my mists, and also I wanted to see how they react with water. And I'm sorry for the fact that the footage is very bright at this stage. It will get better in a few seconds. But basically what I'm doing here is I am adding the Nebula Blue and the Fresh Pear quite heavily onto my watercolor cardstock, and I am keeping the sprays close to my paper so that I get this sort of a spotty look. And I guess the background could look interesting as it is already, but I wanted to see what would happen if I added water. So I went ahead and I sprayed some with my distress sprayer. And I first started light and I was adding water basically to the center of these pots. And then I went a little bit heavier and sprayed basically the entire panel with water. And now I am drying everything once again with my heat gun. And you can see that I got this very interesting, almost crackled effect. And what I'm guessing happened is that in those areas where the mica powders and the pigment were more concentrated, those basically stuck to the paper, and the rest got almost washed away by the water, leaving this pattern behind. And obviously I don't know for sure that this is what happened exactly, but I really love the final result and this effect that I got, and I will definitely be experimenting with this technique even more. And once the panel was completely dry, I added a few more drops of both the Nebula Blue and the Fresh Pear to intensify the look, and then I moved on to the next background. For this one, I wanted to see whether or not I would be able to layer complementary colors without getting a muddy result. So as a first step, I sprayed my cardstock piece with Fresh Pear, trying to cover the entire surface. And once I got sufficient coverage, I took my heat gun and dried this layer completely before I went in with my complementary color. And you can see here that I am getting sort of a milder version of that crackled background I just showed you, because the airflow from my heat gun is sort of pushing away the liquid component of the mica mists, and it's creating a texture that I guess it's lighter than the one I had going on my previous background, because on this one I didn't go as heavy with the Fresh Pear, and also I have sort of a homogeneous coat on my background. And once the green layer was dry, I went in with the Turkish rose and I sprayed it here and there, being a little bit conservative because I just wanted to create some color accents on my background. And you can see that there is basically no mixing, and the rose sits on top of the green layer and creates this fun high contrast background. Next up, I decided to see what would happen if I used dark cardstock. So in this case, I'm using black cardstock by Coordinations, which I cut at a standard A2 size. So 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I first added a layer of the silver smoke. I dried it with my heat gun, and then once this panel is dry, I will come in with the antique gold and add a mist of that too. And as you can see, I am keeping the bottles quite high above my panel so that I get this nice and diffused mist. And I think the results on black cardstock are really stunning, and you're basically able to get a starry sky like with, I don't know, in 10 seconds or something like that. I am drying this layer too, and as you can see, the paper did warp quite a bit. But I'll be able to compensate for that once I make a card out of this background. And here you can see all the shimmer. It's really, really pretty. Because I really loved the experiment with the black cardstock, I decided to go ahead and see how these mists look on craft cardstock. And also I wanted to see if I could achieve some sort of an emboss resist effect with them. So I heat embossed the clustered leaves with Weathered White embossing powder by Ranger. This clustered leaves stamp set is by Create a Smile Stamps. And then you saw me add first a little bit of the antique gold to this background, which at this point is not showing very much and doesn't look like anything much, but trust me, this is going to end up being really gorgeous. And if you follow me on Instagram, you'll have already seen this card on my feed. And if you don't, you can find the link down below. But coming back to this background, I am now adding a little bit of the silver smoke, which has a bit of a higher contrast with the craft cardstock. And then again, adding more gold here and there. And you can see, because this is the weathered white, so the embossing is not entirely homogeneous, the mists are sort of seeping through the irregularities in the embossing powder and creating a very interesting effect there where I have the leaves on the top of my panel. And I just went ahead and kept adding the mists until I was happy with the result. And in the end, I dried everything with my heat gun. And I think this is one of my favorite backgrounds among the ones that I created in this session right here. Finally, and this is my last background for today, I wanted to see what would happen when combining these mists with embossing paste, because the experiment with the embossing powder sort of showed me that these mists stain the embossing powder, so it's not like, obviously these are not distress inks, but I was trying to see if I could achieve something similar where you can protect areas of your surface with the embossing powder. And this doesn't really happen very much with these mists, but I wanted to see if with embossing paste things would be different somehow. So I used some embossing paste by Ranger and stencil by Create a Smile stamps to create this starry pattern onto a panel of black cardstock. And now I am adding the silver smoke and the antique gold again. And they did stain the embossing paste a little bit, but because the paste is white and the background was black, I still got enough contrast. And in the end, I think this is another very pretty background I created with these mists. So just to recap, I want to show you again all the backgrounds I created in this experimenting session, which in real life lasted about an hour, but I was taking my time sort of trying to think what kind of techniques I wanted to showcase, how I wanted to test out these products, trying to produce a nice video also to share here with you guys. But if you really wanted to create one or even all of these cards without having to worry about all these things, it would really just take minutes. These are a very great way to create some very quick and fun backgrounds on your cards. And because this is a card making channel, I decided to create some card samples using these backgrounds and to show them to you. For this first card, I die cut 2 circles out of 2 of the panels that I had created using some dies by Tonic Studios. For my sentiment, I used a die by Mama Elephant and I glued that onto a strip of vellum which I adhered onto my card base. For the second card, I trimmed down the panel with the stars to be a bit smaller than an A2 size and I matted that onto some black cardstock. I die cut a circle from vellum. I used some stars by Studio Katia to put some embellishments on my card, and I also used this For You die by Lon Fon. For this one, I basically glued the background as it was after having die cut it with a die by Avriel, again onto some black cardstock. I used this Celebrate die by My Favorite Things for my sentiment, and then I die cut a heart out of my central panel and I glued it back on, just lightly shifted for some fun dimension and movement on the background. For this one, which is my favorite of them all, as I already said, I basically just cut down the panel using a die by Lon Fon and added this Thanks die cut by Create a Smile stamps. I also heat embossed that with weathered embossing powder and sprayed some more of the gold and silver mica mist onto the sentiment so that it would match with my background. And finally, for the starry sky, I die cut the words thank you using a die by My Favorite Things, and I use some gold cardstock, and I matted my panel onto some black cardstock again. And this is my last card for today. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below. And in any case, please let me know what you thought about it, because this was the first time for me making a video like this, so I would really like to know what you think about it. For a more in-depth description of the supplies I used on each of the cards that I've shown today, you can visit my blog, which will be linked in the description box down below, and I will catch you guys soon with the next video. Ciao!